always tried to create in as Tolkienian a way as possible. So some of that means going back to the original myths that inspired him. Some of that just means going back to the books obsessively. We started every day of the writer's room with a quote from Tolkien. I've always been sort of a fan of Indian cuisine and Indian music and of Bollywood films. But Indian mythology is something I haven't done the deep dive on. But after spending a little bit of time here, I really want to do a deeper dive on it. Our watchword always was just go back to the books, go back to the books, go back to the books. And there's some awesome female characters in the books, and we found that there are opportunities to go deeper into some of their stories. Like, for example, Galadriel, her very name means, sort of loosely translated to elf maiden with a crown of golden hair upon her head. And the reason for that is that when she would spar with other elves, she would put her hair in braids and put like a crown on her head. So the idea of Galadriel as warrior is just embedded into the very DNA of Middle-earth. So we said, okay, well, what if we meet Galadriel before she was the sort of wise, matronly lady of Lothlorien, and when she was a warrior on a battlefield? And then in terms of some of the female friendships, those grew very organically out of the stories of Middle-earth. Tolkien has this wonderfully tantalizing bit in Concerning Hobbits, where he talks about the wandering days and these three branches, Harfoots, Falahides, and Stores. And so he said, like, Harfoots sound really interesting. And it speaks of them being as beardless, bootless, and slightly darker of skin than the other branches of Hobbitdom. So he said, that sounds interesting. What kind of people would live in that sort of world? And then we said, well, what if there's these two young women? And very quickly developed this very organic friendship between what became the actors of Markella Kavanagh and Megan Richards. It brings, it's just a lot into the show. So we were excited to just have all kinds of different relationships and people and stories in the show. I'm not super well acquainted with Indian mythology per se, and I should say mythologies, because I think there's lots of different strains of it that run through the various cultures in India. So that's not something that I've consciously worked into Tolkien, but I'm a student of mythology in general in humanity. And I think Tolkien was as well, and there are some universal themes that I think run through the myths of various peoples. After coming here, I'm getting really excited about, I've always been sort of a fan of Indian cuisine and Indian music and of Bollywood films, but Indian mythology is something I haven't done the deep dive on. But after spending a little bit of time here, I really want to do a deeper dive on it. So ask me again season 2. Tolkien spoke about not wanting to write allegorical work, but write work that was always applicable. So he didn't want you to sort of like read his books and say, oh, well, clearly this character is that politician over there, or these people represent that culture over there, because then once you've sort of like done the math, the story so it doesn't have much more to it. But he wanted it to be something that was applicable across all times, and have themes that you could go back to and sort of revisit in new contexts again and again. And it's these timeless themes of good versus evil, right? Of underdogs, these sort of like small characters who are tasked with great things. The corrupting nature of power, the enduring power of friendship to overcome great evil. I mean, these are classic Tolkienian themes that resonate all across different ages and different cultures. So those were very important to us to get right. And then also finally, like the idea of factionalization within societies, like in Numenor, you see these two sort of factions developing, and what happens when we cease to be able to really communicate with each other and get to that point where our society is crumbling. So I think these are things that are very applicable today, that I hope people will be able to watch and apply in ways that we couldn't have even anticipated, to their own, whether it's families or to their own civilizations. Tolkien, I think, is more applicable now than ever. I'm by no means an expert on world cinema or Indian cinema in particular, but from what I understand, I think India is putting out many times as many films every year as Hollywood, and so has a really thriving film market, which I think is influencing world cinema for good. I have every Bollywood movie I've seen I've enjoyed. I love Lagan. This movie came out maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago almost. Yeah, but I love it as the spirit that comes with it. I love the idea that at any moment all of us could break out in song and just like start dancing, because that feels very human to me. Like I have a very joyful spirit inside me, and for me the idea of like song and music always being like sort of right at our footsteps is something that's really appealing, and so I love that spirit that and also the really wonderfully visual imagination that a lot of Indian films that I've seen they're so fantastical and so visual, and so I love visual storytelling that takes you on sort of a luscious treat. So I think that it's a very positive influence on cinema in general in the world, and I hope to be able to become better acquainted with myself, as I continue to learn. So Tolkien has a quote that we love to refer to, where he spoke about wanting to create an interconnected series of myths and still leave room for other minds and hands wielding paint and music and drama. So it was his wish that people would come after him and continue to excavate Middle-earth. I mean, he often spoke not of creating Middle-earth, but he always felt like he was working with something that kind of pre-existed him and that he was discovering more than creating. And we've had that same experience where he left us sort of like the tip of an iceberg, and then we would sort of like continue to sort of go underneath it to see what's down there. And we always tried to create in as Tolkienian a way as possible. So some of that means going back to the original myths that inspired him. Some of that just means going back to the books obsessively. We started every day of the writer's room with a quote from Tolkien and just tried to stay in tune. But then also, as you said, we did have to invent and adapt and translate really from one medium into the next. And there were times where he'll give us just 3 or 4 sentences about a character who does pivotal things in the story. So we know what they do, and we know kind of where they come from. But in terms of what's their personality like, are they pleasant to be around? Are they, are they difficult? How do we really flesh them out and turn them into a 3-dimensional being? That's challenging, you try to make sure that you're doing it in a way that feels true to Middle-earth. Feels like when people watch it, they look at it, they feel like it's always been there. We also worked very closely with the Tolkien estate, Simon Tolkien, who's the grandson of J.R.R. Tolkien, and with Tolkien experts like Tom Shippey, who holds Tolkien's chair at Oxford, and Carl Hofstetter is the Tolkien language expert, John Howe, who has been drawing Middle-earth for decades. So working also very closely with Tolkien experts and with the Tolkien estate helped us to really have confidence that when we were inventing and adding on to Tolkien, we were doing it in as respectful a way as possible. We have 50 hours of show planned. It's the Forging of the Rings of Power, it's the Rise of the Dark Lord Sauron, the Fall of Numenor, and then the Last Alliance of Elves and Men. So it's this really epic Tolkienian story that has only ever really been glimpsed before. We know what the last shot of the show is going to be. One advantage we have of having Amazon having committed to doing 5 seasons and 50 hours of show is that we know sort of what the canvas is, and we can say, okay, we're setting up seeds of character decisions and choices in season 1 that will pay off 40 hours later from now. And so that's a really cool thing as a writer to be able to plan out a story that's that long. I don't think we can meet everyone's expectations. I'm sure some people are going to be frustrated with decisions we've made, and some people are going to be ecstatic with decisions we've made. I think we just are, as dramatists, are trying to do the very best we can and make a show that will be faithful to Tolkien, but also surprising in certain ways, and take characters that you know and love and meet them in different contexts, and in some cases many thousands of years before you've met them before. So like Elrond, for example, is a character that's very near and dear to people's hearts. People know him as this sort of somewhat jaded and cynical elder statesman. The elves have one foot out the door, and their time is coming to a close, and men are weak. But we're going to meet him when elves were at the height of their civilization, he was at the sort of center of elven power as a right-hand man to the king. So we'll meet an Elrond that is optimistic and young and has all kinds of plans for what he wants to do in Middle-earth, and we're going to sort of watch him go on this journey. Where you see why he becomes, the sort of more jaded and cynical elder statesman in the sort of later part of his life. We hope people go on those journeys and get to meet beloved characters in new contexts and get to enjoy them and meet them all as though for the first time. When we first started off with this, we wrote to our mentor, J.J. Abrams, with whom we'd worked on Star Trek, and he directed Star Wars. I'm sure you know who J.J. is, but we told him we got the job and asked him for his advice. And he said, say, I don't know a lot, but trust your instincts. And so we did. We tried to approach this with a lot of humility and say, like, look, we've never done something like this before, but there's a lot of really smart people who have. And so we brought in a wonderful producer, Lindsay Weber, and then with her we built out an entire team of really amazing collaborators, and not just collaborators but mentors, people we knew we could really trust and people who were at the top of their game. And I could go through and list all of them, but you can go and find out where that information is available publicly. And all of them were just wonderful to work with. We would sit down and we had a vision for what this should be, and then we would say to them, go off and explore, bring back ideas, and hopefully those ideas will challenge us and make something better than any of us could make on our own. And if they went too far off the reservation, we'd say, okay, come on back in. But often they would bring back things that we'd never thought of, and that were really cool ideas that would then make us go and change the scripts a little bit. So it was a constant process of inspiring each other. But I'd say, one of the things that I personally maybe learned most of the course of season 1 and had to grow with as an artist was, learning when to stay true to your initial vision and when to be flexible and when to let go. Because there's times when an idea that seemed like the best thing in the world when you were in the writer's room, you realize, okay, that's going to be impossible to create in terms of budget or just in terms of the practicality of shooting something, and those resources are better put investing in those other 5 ideas, and sometimes it's hard to let go. And sometimes you need to stay on something because, no, that's going to be the core of the thing. And if you let go of that, then the whole thing will fall apart. So really figuring out, as they say, when to hold them, when to fold them, is a challenging thing, and one that I have had to grow with as an artist over the course of season 1.